for the Gathering podcast.
So for the second episode of the second season of the Gathering podcast, we sat down with Roy Wainer from Townish. And we talked about kind of like his background that was not necessarily in creating offsites for people, but that's kind of what the company does, is it matches spaces and experiences for teams to come together in, and companies, and says, hey, we can create this kind of offsite, thing for you.
If you are a person that is the catch-all at a company, when it's just like, nobody's doing this, but we need somebody to do it. Can you do this? That's what I took away from the conversation of, okay, if I am that person, how do I evolve? How do I grow? What are my, and he highlights what his strengths are. If you're eventually looking to become a founder or an entrepreneur, that's exactly the type of role you want to be in. He talks about some of those lessons.
You're right. And I think what comes across is that like Roy necessarily might not have been a people person in the sense of always wanting to like concert effort amongst people, but he always seems to have had like a strategic value for the way that a company should progress and grow. Yeah. Right. He used that word a few times in this episode.
Growth.
Like growth. And so he always wanted to grow whatever company he's with. And I think, his colleagues or people that became his colleagues were like, well, we need that energy and we need someone to focus on that and do whatever you need to like make sure we grow, which inevitably means, organizing labor and getting people together around a strategic vision.
Yeah.
So that's a good one, man. Episode 2.
Episode.
Listen to the people. Listen to the people and culture. Oh yeah, it's time for the Gathering podcast. It's time for the Gathering podcast.
Roy Wainer,
indeed.
thank you for joining us at the StartWell studio for another episode of the Gathering podcast.
Great to be here. Nice to meet you guys.
Pleasure to have you. Of course, in person, right?
In person. I think
we've met in person before.
We met in person. I met Martin in person as well. It's probably
just not
third time, but nice to be here.
Yeah, I've never met the two of us at the same time.
Of course not.
Right?
It's a whole different
explosion of like
special.
of
goodness. So we wanted to have you here to tell us your story and share it with the audience, because I think it's going to be an interesting one for all of us who work directly or tangentially in like people and culture and HR, because from what I understand of your career, you've come to it from an interesting place and from doing a little bit of corporate stuff and corporate development stuff.
Yes, indeed. I think everyone's career is coming from an interesting place. I think, people are like unique and have unique experiences. So I don't know if mine is like more interesting than other experiences.
So humble.
Right.
But I actually started my career in finance. And I've always been like a finance guy. I've been probably reading finance books since I was 10 years old.
Wow. Was your dad in finance? Is that why?
He wasn't
a banker or something?
No, he wasn't finance. He was in tech. But finance was always his hobby as well. And I think it's kind of like, this is what may happen to me as well. Like my finance became my hobby. It started in my career. Did bachelor degree in economics, did MBA in finance. Started my career in consulting. But then I was working a lot with like clients. I will all the time work with clients, all the time kind of like help clients do, execute on their next project, execute on the next 2 days, execute on the next month. And I felt like I'm not building anything. And I wanted to build something. I lived in Tel Aviv back then. Tel Aviv, I don't know if you know, but it's like a strong tech hub.
Everyone's just like coding and drinking fizzy bubbly and chilling on the beach.
Exactly. And then I started, started getting this like itch of like, I want to do something. I want to do startup. I want to do something interesting. Yeah. I joined a startup in Israel. I also co-founded another startup in kind of like in parallel, which was like kind of like an impact startup. And I started kind of like,
Wait, tell us about that. What? Sorry, you just cruise through that whole history there.
Yeah. Oh, sure. I don't know how much time I have, so
don't rush. Relax.
Okay.
An impact startup. So what do you mean by that? What was that company doing?
So it's interesting. So I don't know if you're aware of it, but like in India and Bangladesh and some other countries in Asia, a lot of kids go to school and they go above rivers, and sometimes there's like actually a drowning issue there. A lot of kids, like 5, 6 years old, they just go to school. Sometimes they just have to cross rivers. They don't know how to swim.
Yeah, like maybe they're crawling on top of some sewage kind of pipe or something like that.
Exactly.
There's no bridge. Yeah.
Exactly. So I actually started working together with 2 industrial engineers, and we wanted to build something like very affordable to allow for these kids to actually go to school with some kind of like flotation belt. And
That's cool, huh?
And the Western flotation belts cost, I remember back then it was like probably 8 years ago. They used to cost like $50, maybe now it's even more.
Yeah.
We wanted to do something that is like as cheap as $1. And we wanted to do something very affordable. So we actually thought of doing something that involves actually used or like recycled bottles of Coca-Cola or like water or whatever, and just create like a very, very easy to use and friendly flotation belt. And we got to the point that we're some kind of prototype, and we actually joined this very big accelerator in Israel for impact investing. But what I didn't know before I started it was how tough it is to raise money for, or like fundraise for non-profit startups.
Right. Oh yeah.
With no business model, because like even if it costs like $1 or $2, the user is not going to be able to pay for it. So we wanted someone else to pay for it and then just deliver it to them. And we started speaking with a bunch of like different groups of like NGOs and like nonprofit. And what we realized is most of them also want money. They can't, it's like, that's the way it works. Like there are probably like 99% of this industry just wants money. And maybe there is 1% that can actually deliver some donations. So the business model wasn't there.
And you were how old when you were doing this? This is coming out of B school or something, did you say?
No. So first of all, in Israel, you do the army. So I actually went to undergrad when I was 22.
Yeah.
I started my career in finance when I was 25 or 6. And I joined startups. I started the startup world when I was 28. So, and then in parallel, I did this. And I also joined another startup as a kind of like the operation lead or, some kind of role that is almost like, I would say it's kind of like chief of staff in today's world. Where I kind of like spearheaded like the finance, the operations, the strategy, a lot of the things. It was a seed startup. Going backwards, also like kind of like thinking about my mistakes.
That's what we're here for.
Yeah.
Tell us about everything you did wrong in your life.
I think I've done a lot of mistakes in the past, like choosing my career, but I also done a lot of mistakes and like kind of like not deciding not to pursue my best ideas in a timely manner. So this startup wasn't a mistake to join, it was a mistake probably to stay as long as I did.
Yeah.
Because it just didn't go anywhere. But it was actually a very interesting...
So the learning from that, to share with anyone in our audience who might be going through that question, what's your recommendation on when to pull the plug on a job that doesn't feel right?
It's a good question. And obviously there are a lot of like things to consider, like salary, compensation. Some people care more about stability. But in my opinion, life is short. Your 20s are short, even more than life is short.
Yeah, you realize that in your 40s.
And like when you're 60 years old, it's going to be hard for you to work in a startup. So I think if you want to work in a startup, you have to work in a startup that is successful. You have to work in a startup that is growing. And even if it's not growing, everything happens fast. You're just not flat. So in my opinion, if you feel like things are like kind of like stagnant, this is the time you should leave. And if you feel you're not growing anymore. So I got to a point where I kind of like, the first year was like really, really like, I learned a lot. I didn't know anything about startup and about fundraising. But then like after a year, I felt like I'm kind of like, I'm stagnant. And then I stick for another year because we actually knew that we're going to move to Canada, me and my wife. So it kind of like made me stagnant. But I do believe in what Sheryl Sandberg said. Like I think lean in, lean in, and like if you feel that things are like flat or like stagnant, this is the time to leave.
That's Sheryl Sandberg from Facebook.
Exactly. She's not for Facebook anymore, but yeah.
I like that lesson.
It's also not Facebook anymore, but yeah.
Like, hey guys, everyone at this company building things that people don't use anymore should just go and do something else. So Canada, tell me about that. You're here in Canada. You moved from Tel Aviv.
This
was like a choice that you were excited about, winters and so on?
So the first time I came to Toronto, it was summer.
Someone bought him a snowsuit as like a joke, and he's like, "Hey, yeah, that's a great idea. I'm gonna go to Canada."
So the first time actually we came to visit was actually in the summer. It was September. It was like I know that September is not exactly the summer, but it was like relatively warm. It was the TIFF actually. It was so exciting to be in Toronto.
Yeah.
And we were actually thinking of moving somewhere just for like the adventure. My wife wanted to do MBA somewhere. So we were kind of like researching different schools in the US. Eventually, we actually decided on Canada, mostly for like visa purposes, actually.
Like it was easy to come here.
In the US, it's like if you're like a spouse of a student in the US, you're not necessarily going to get a working visa.
Okay.
But in Canada, it's just an immediate process. Everything happens like in a few days.
Mm-hmm.
So we decided to move here. We decided to kind of like see what happens. And we heard a lot of good things about Toronto. We knew a lot of like people that live here. We knew about the winter, but obviously there was difference between knowing that the winter exists to actually, suffering through the winter. And it was funny. We actually got an advice from a friend of ours that lives in Chicago. And he told us, for the first year, don't go anywhere during the winter. Just don't take any vacation. Just experience it and see what's up. So we decided to pursue it, and it was actually terrible winter for us. What was
the hardest thing about it?
I think the hardest thing about it is actually not like the weather. Like the hardest thing is just like people like become like much more, like people stay at home. People are not out as much.
Sorry. And when was this? What year did you move here?
2017.
Okay, so a couple of years before the pandemic.
Yeah. So it was before the pandemic, but people are, people still change their behavior when it's starting to get colder. And this is something like we didn't expect.
Right.
Because in Tel Aviv, there's a difference between the summer and the winter, but like the winter is still probably like 15 degrees. So it's not the end of the world. People are still going out. Mm-hmm. Even now, during the war, people are still going out. It's like it's a country where like people are like very much, work out, play hard in a way.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like so the weather was actually not like a big issue, but like the fact that people are like more isolated was a big issue for us.
Oh yeah.
But by then I actually started already like working, so it was actually manageable. Few months after I came to Toronto, I met through some mutual friend. I met one of the co-founders of a company used to call Platterz. Now it's called Thriver, which was a marketplace for food to the office.
Oh, this is interesting.
Yeah.
Platterz became Thriver.
Yeah.
There was a big pivot.
See, no one told us about that. When we used Platterz, so we were like B2B customers of Platterz.
Yeah.
Because Platterz, correct me if I'm wrong, but Platterz was almost like a kind of a value-added marketplace for catering.
Yeah, exactly.
And so we liked it. I remember a couple of my staff using that for client engagements and helping clients, organize, source food and so on. And then we suddenly noticed that it disappeared. I don't think they communicated that they didn't exist or that they were doing something different.
Maybe you should interview someone from Platterz.
But so
it makes sense.
Tell us.
To their pivot,
So you were at Thriver. So now what was Thriver?
So I joined Platterz in 2017, the end of 2017 when I moved here. And I joined also like in kind of like a vague position of someone that like is responsible for like the growth of the company. But like pretty instantly, I kind of like took a bunch of like different roles because the company was like in a hyper growth mode.
Okay, wait, pause.
Yeah.
Over to like people and culture man over here. This is interesting for me, and I'm sure for some of our listeners and audience, is how companies can advertise a role, especially one that particularly is very...
You didn't advertise. That's the thing. It was very... And maybe once we kind of like start speaking about my kind of like, my new company, I can tell you also about it. But like, I think what I've noticed in life is that like the best CEOs are like very opportunistic about like, and not only CEOs, like executives in general, very opportunistic about hiring. This role wasn't advertised, but like when I met the CEO, we had good chemistry. He understood that he needs me for what he wants to achieve. I understood that I need him for what I wanted to achieve.
Sure.
And it was a big, it was a match. And I think, like this role, there wasn't like any role advertised. I think if it wasn't for me, they probably wouldn't hire this person after Series A because I joined seed, like after seed.
So from your example, Martin, like what do you think in terms of because you always hear these stories, right? Is that like companies kind of like have to fill gaps in their operations, and they have to kind of like create the topography of what an organizational structure is so that they can hire to fill these roles. But you always hear these stories of how, the best fit often comes from referrals or comes from these sorts of like nuanced personal relationships. How often is that? And is that a particular type of job that gets filled in this kind of casual way?
Absolutely. Like what you've said twice now, or a few times, is this ambiguous, nebulous rule.
Like, twice actually. Yeah.
There's this like
the generalist role.
The generalist, but even the generalist that can be strategic. I think, right? Chief of staff is we don't have a solution for this, so we need someone scrappy that's not just going to go down a rabbit hole. So it comes up a lot. Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And so it seems like that, given your experience from like a startup perspective, that you can kind of jump into those roles pretty quickly. It's like, what do you need? What's the most important thing for the business right now? How can we move the dial on that, initiative, that OKR, whatever the case might be? Maybe we don't have OKRs. But what I find interesting, given your experience, and I'm curious, is you've seen this in different companies where it's sort of like serving a need. What are the common themes? Because companies should be hiring for this role earlier, right? Yeah. But it sounds like you identify the problem with the CEO or a senior person at the company, and they're like, oh, we should hire Roy because I heard these things and those are problems we have. And they just don't know what they don't know, so to speak. So like, what is the thing that startup companies should know so that they hire for this role faster?
I think they should just be all the time. I think let me take a step back. I think hiring is probably the best way and probably the only way to scale a startup. And I think as the company becomes more mature, I think the CEO role, probably the founder's role, and probably even the executive's role is to focus at least 50% of the time in hiring. And this means sometimes doing things that are kind of like look like waste of time. Just having coffees with people, joining on many calls, going to events even, doing things that like not necessarily scale. But I think they are so important because I think the CEO doesn't even know what he needs, but he needs someone that's like gonna be there for him and gonna be the person that just like thinking out of the box and pursuing these different initiatives and executing on them.
Like an internal management consultant.
Kind of, yeah. And I can give you like an example for, in 2018, for example, I was always like very aggressive about like the growth of the company. Even probably more than the founders. I had like crazy goals for the company. We wanted like to launch new cities after Series A. I said we will be able to launch probably 7 or 8 cities in 2018. And we'll be able to get the company from 30 employees to 120 employees. And actually, the board of directors were actually laughing at us. Like they just didn't assume it's actually possible to do it like for a company this size. So I just decided, okay, I want to launch these cities. I want to launch LA in May. I want to launch Chicago in June. I want to launch Boston in August, whatever. Back then, we actually hired people in the cities. So like we hired people physically in the cities. And I just like stayed. I put like probably like few all-nighters. I just like started poaching people on LinkedIn, poaching people from different industries, that mostly B2B in other tech companies that I felt were kind of like adjacent to what we did.
But you didn't have a particular like templated organizational structure for each city and we're filling those roles.
I had a template and I kind of like built also the template as we went. Like I kind of like, okay, I knew if we want like to launch the city in, I don't know, in May, then by March, I need to hire someone to kind of like acquire the supply in the city. So like acquire more like restaurants that can actually help us deliver to customers.
This is interesting, okay? Because you're going to tell me about this in a second. But you didn't immediately put any kind of like formal HR structures in place to help you? Like you didn't.
I was the first HR, so I was like the first recruiter in the company in this sense. Even though I came from finance, I came from operations, but I was just poaching people. Then I convinced the CEO we need to get HR recruiter in place. Mm-hmm. We brought someone to actually manage the recruiting or the talent acquisition process. And if like in the beginning, I actually managed her, and we kind of like built together all the talent acquisition process in the company. And I managed a lot of departments that were very different than what I did before. But I think it's not necessarily because I was the best at doing it. It's mostly because I was like the most assertive and most aggressive about doing it and about growth of the company. And this is what the CEO wants, right? Like the CEO, he doesn't necessarily need perfection at this point. And he also like a lot of people from the startup industry will tell you like not to hire executives, when you're like a seed company or Series A, because executive, when they come, they need to manage a team. They need to hire a team. They need to work based on the processes that they know how to execute on. So I think at this stage of the company, when it's like seed, Series A, you just need people that like get the work done.
Yeah.
Whatever it means. If it's like
for you is like all-round growth. You wanted to see the team scale. You wanted to see revenue scale. You wanted to see reach and customer like market share expand.
Yeah, I mean, obviously some of these are like kind of like vanity metrics, right? Like,
are they? I don't know. You tell us about
like number of employees. I think I think all of us went through some changes like in the last 2 years once like the interest rates started to pick up, and we do understand that what we thought about like number of employees is probably a lot of it was kind of like was a bubble in a way.
Yeah.
I think obviously number of employees it means something, but like it's not really important. It's just a reflection of what you can achieve as a company. So if you hire more people than you should have, if you hire more people than your revenues are, if you hire more people then actually you can, then if you hire more employees, then you can actually feed in the sense that like actually provide them with like the right org structure, provide them with like the right structure to grow, provide them with like the right career path. Mm-hmm. And I think it just becomes sometimes like an organizational nightmare. So I do think that like companies understood that they need to slow down a little bit, like the growth of employees, but growth in terms of revenues, for sure. I think it's just like money don't lie. Like it's kind of like if you grow in terms of revenues, if you grow in terms of customers.
Yeah, you're talking about like sustainability, right? And if you're on the right path and it feels good and it's sustainable, then you can keep going.
That's the thing, and I think this is like maybe the one caveat, because sometimes when you grow even too fast in terms of revenues, you kind of like there are a lot of like things that like hiding kind of like and like you always need to be, I think as a startup founder or a startup executive, you always need to have like full awareness of things that are not exactly the way they should be when it comes to like if maybe, for us, like at Platterz, for example, maybe one city is growing less quickly than other city, or like maybe one type of customer is growing less quickly than other types of customers. And we should have like kind of like reflected in, and we should have understood probably better, but this is like startup. You never know in advance like what you need to do. But I think you always need to investigate yourself, and you always need to kind of like to have like full awareness to everything that happens in the company, and you need the people that help you to do it, because like the CEO cannot do everything.
Right.
What's the biggest thing you took away from that experience that has helped you with what you're building now?
So first of all, I'm building a marketplace. So even in terms of the business model, I think it's very similar.
Because we didn't define this, but like what did Thriver do post Platterz?
Yeah. So post obviously, just to kind of like go a step back. So what we did was connecting between companies to restaurants. So before COVID, people were 5 days in the office, right? The market was big. Employers used to feed employees, and then one day, just the world is shut down, right? And Platterz had to change. And luckily, we raised Series B pre-COVID, so we had a lot of like resources. But still, sometimes having a Series B investors on your cap table is not necessarily the best thing once you kind of like lose all of your revenues. So we did a little bit of like pivot. We decided to focus on everything the company needs, or everything the office needs. So food is still big part of it, but it's not the only thing. So it includes also like snacks and coffee and furniture and plants and a bunch of like different services for the office. And I stayed at Platterz for probably the first year after COVID. There was so much uncertainty back then, like so much uncertainty about, when people are going to go back to the office, if they're going to go back to the office.
Right.
And I didn't want, like jump ship like in the beginning of COVID. I still am like a good friend with like the founders of Platterz. But at some point I decided I want to, start my own thing. And I didn't know back then what I want to start. So I started like a very long ideation process in parallel to doing some other stuff like consulting, also like some financial projects, because we already talk about my kind of like love and affection for finance. But yeah, eventually I kind of like decided to focus on the idea of Townish, which was kind of, I think like a very natural evolvement from Thriver to me. In many ways, first of all, it's another marketplace. So what we do is instead of connecting between companies to restaurant, we connect between companies to different services for events outside of the office, usually. It can be venues like StartWell, it can be accommodation, it can be guest speakers, it can be workshops. So we kind of like have like a full, one-stop shop to enhance events for companies and to facilitate more and more events for companies, especially companies becoming increasingly hybrid or remote.
It's like a travel agent for events, right? Like you don't want to book the entire vacation yourself. Yeah. You don't know what the best flights are. Yeah. Am I getting it?
You're getting it right. I think the only caveat, when we speak about travel agents, it sounds very easy to replace it because travel agents work with consumers. And when consumers book events, it's relatively easy in terms of like booking an hotel, in terms of like booking a flight. All of the things are relatively solved. So it's very easy to replace travel agents with like Airbnb or with like, Air Canada, whatever. No offense to any travel agents, but like, that's kind of like my 2 cents. But when it comes to booking events for a company, it's increasingly harder. It's probably exponentially harder than booking events for like 2 people. It's prone to so many errors, and the events are very complicated to execute on. The idea eventually is to get to a point where we are travel agents for companies, and they can book any type of event on Townish platform. It's going to take some time to get there. But yeah, the idea is that once you start, you want to book an events for your team, you get connected with people that help you on setting the visas for your employees. You get connected with transportation. You get connected with different hotels. You get connection with
Sounds like
different...
the best kind of travel agent. Like a travel concierge.
Yeah.
Travel concierge, but very automated and everything going to be done online. And everything going to be done. You're going to have like your company dashboard. You're going to be able to see... first of all, you're going to be able to invite your team. You're going to be able to see the schedule of the event and do this on the platform. One of the features that we're actually just about to launch in a few weeks, which I'm very proud of, is event schedule, where you can actually drag and drop your different services on the platform. Then we'll be able to actually book them for you according to the time slot that you actually specify.
So that's a means of people building out an agenda for you guys to fulfill.
Exactly.
So you're creating workflow within your platform that essentially makes it easier for them, but then you're like, I could help you with this. I could help you with this.
Exactly. And
for everything.
And obviously with full transparency and as a person that built a marketplace or two, a lot of things starting manually, and we just launched 8 months ago. So a lot of the things that I am speaking about now, we're just doing manually for now.
So Wizard of Oz,
Let's talk. Sorry, what was that?
Wizard of Oz.
Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, wait, there's nothing behind this curtain. Let's talk.
Well, they get the same service, obviously.
Well, that's the point. I mean, you're in the service industry, so if you're automating stuff, that's cool. Do it. Once it makes sense. But it's really about giving that value to the customer that you're seeing from the outside.
That's the thing. Actually, our clients don't really care if we do it for them or they do it online. We actually care because it's hard to scale like this, right? Like you need to automate a lot of the tasks that you do in-house. So in 5 years from now, I'm not going to be the one that calling, like the hotel in Prince Edward County and like ask them if they have room for like 20 people. But the client actually don't care even now. They just want good service. They want like the event to look good. They want the events to be successful. They want their manager to be happy with the results and all the employees. And this is actually some of the feedback that we get from clients is, and some of the feedback that kind of like made them come to us is that like they usually book events, they're not successful, the employees are not happy with the events, the employees are just feeling, oh, we're just wasting our time for this. Why did you take us to do this in this day where we can just like stay at home and just not meet, and like it's going to be probably more fun. So the clients don't really care about the automation. They care about, first of all, the discovery of services. So they want to know that like, okay, if we want to book an event for like 20 people, which co-working space should I use? Should I use StartWell? Will StartWell be good for my team? They first need to know about StartWell. Then they need to know that like this is actually going to fit what they need. Mm-hmm. And then they're going to need to actually build an agenda around it. And with the service providers that around this location, with the right food, with the right guest speakers, with the right workshop.
Yeah.
And this is extremely complicated in terms of when you think about it like manually, but if you think about the way you can automate it and operationalize it long term, it actually becomes increasingly easier as we have like more and more services.
Sure. Townish GPT. I'm trying to plan this, right? Like make an agenda for me. I don't like Moroccan food, but I like Middle Eastern food. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Get us to a restaurant.
Yeah, if you want, I can speak probably like 10 minutes about the way AI is going to help us.
Well, we'll get to AI in a sec. What I do want to know, though, if you can spit this out easily, what are the top, give me 5 use cases that clients are currently coming to you for? What types of meetings are they trying to plan through Townish?
Yeah, so...
Or events, as you call them.
Yeah, so it varies, obviously. I would say like the most, I would say, like the easiest use case for clients, and I can tell you actually, frankly, they probably don't need us for this, is just like a company that actually is like hybrid, let's say. They actually go to the office like once in a while, and they just want to meet for like a team building activity. They want to do like a cooking class, they want to do like a art workshop, they want to do something like this. And we have few vendors of this on the platform. And I think we actually got like some really cool ideas on the platform, but it's pretty much a solved problem. Mm-hmm. It's not that hard to find this service. It's not that hard to organize it. And you don't really need us for this. You need us if it's part of your entire vision for like activities for the company. So that's like, I would say like the easiest use case.
Just say it again. What was the first one in a nutshell?
Team building activities.
Team building activities. Okay, number 2.
And then I'm going to go to the most complex one. And then we're just going to find ourselves in the middle, if it makes sense.
Yeah. Here, look, I'll use that finger. There we go. We're hanging loose right now.
So the most complex one is, let's say, 3-4 days offsite for a team that is relatively big. So it can be like, 100 people or like 150 or 200 people.
Yeah.
And then you need to book an hotel, you need to book a transportation, you need to make sure that like the agenda makes sense when it comes to work things, when it comes to like to other kind of like guests that you bring in.
Roy, I have my definition for this because obviously we facilitate these at StartWell every day. But what is your definition of what an offsite is?
It's a good question, because I think the idea of on-site also diminished a little bit like in the last few years. There's no really on-site anymore for a lot of companies. So I would say off-site is anything that is kind of like off your proper site. So like anything that, like if you have a site that you are usually working from, this site is different site. So if you're working from home, this site can be like Prince Edward County, but if you also work from an office, it can also be Prince Edward County. It's just off your main site.
Literal definition.
Yeah.
Off your normal site individually.
Yeah, and actually, I'm not a big fan of using the word offsites, but it's a very commonly used word in the industry. For me, it's anything about like in-person gatherings.
Interesting.
Because in-person gathering can take everywhere.
I have a whole like philosophy around offsites. We got a whole more built out. Well, it's, I mean, that's a whole nother podcast, but like, I mean, it started with that in 2019, StartWell was seeing offsites as simply that, in being these kind of like meetings that can happen outside of the office, where the majority of teams coming here at least had their own built out, real estate architecture, infrastructure. And so it was like, oh, well, we might have meeting rooms, but we want to just change of scenery. And that was really the number one ask, change of scenery. The number two ask was gatherings that require a certain type of infrastructure that they don't have in the office. It might be a larger room, So we want to gather the full team. Now, in our office, that full team gathering might mean that we have to be in different rooms because we just can't fit everyone in one space. But now, you're right. Things have changed in terms of like, hybrid work, flex, whatever you want to call it, people having small offices in the boonies, offices underneath their pillow, it's like, it's gotten crazy. So the request that we have every day and that we fulfill here at StartWell is really, offsites have kind of grown into a full end-to-end experience for us. So I think, maybe that's where you were going. You didn't really say it, but like in the most complex ask from a client for you would be that like full experience where we're bringing people to a location. We want those people obviously to be able to do the work that we need of them, do the collaboration, feel inspired. For us, it's a magical thing that we facilitate, right? Like you want those people when they collaborate, especially if they're like working at home and they're not used to seeing each other in person and they're going to be like in person. So they want to feel like jazzed up to be there, but they also want to like create when they're together. They want to make stuff. They want to like, work in ways that they can't in their differentiated physical space. And then part of that also is about the lived experience and the time that they're together. Because that fulfills that first role, which is team building. Yeah. So it's
an interesting thing.
Yeah.
Between what you two are talking about, if I'm looking at it as a bit of an outsider, because you're both like offsites, forget, if you don't like the word, but offsites are your jam. Yeah. But in different ways, like your platform would recommend StartWell.
It already does.
Of the time.
I mean, manually. It already does. Yeah.
We're on it. We're on Townish.
Yeah. Wizard of Oz, right? And you're like, oh, you should use StartWell. But what I was thinking, and forgive me going off the deep end here, but sort of like back to like the 60s, 70s with like the acid trip and stuff, where it's like set and setting. So I see, like, having been to the location for StartWell, I'm like, this is a really good place for companies to align on mission, vision, brainstorming, like we're getting work done. Mm-hmm. You can do team building here for sure. Yeah. But then there's this other aspect that you're probably facilitating. You're saying Prince Edward County. I've got this, idea in my mind of like, that's more intimate. That's where we're getting to know the team better. We're not figuring out our product. We're not figuring out the next 2 or 3 years. Mm-hmm. We're figuring ourselves out, which you kind of, what order of operations
it's
that is.
It's okay to fart in front of Frank Judy.
Yeah. Judy thinks it's funny or whatever, right? Like,
I think like every in-person gathering or offsite has 3 parts to it. The first one is just work, like collaborative work, strategic work. The second one is team building. And the third one is just fun. And I think the borders between them are like very vague or ambiguous. And like, it's really hard to differentiate like what's team building, what's fun. And I think every event has some kind of proportion between the 3 of them. Yeah. But companies that becoming increasingly remote or increasingly kind of like hybrid, but like not really hybrid, like it's kind of like 1 day a month or something like this, they are very much focused on the work thing. And they are very much focused on doing things that they actually cannot do at home or can do them like in a probably worse way. Like strategic work or like kind of like building the plan for 2024. Working on the vision, alignment across the vision of the company, working on the goals of the company, doing a lot of like leadership coaching is also like usually done in person. And we've seen a lot of like executive teams that actually use us for leadership coaching. Mm-hmm. So I think the work part, and I think this is probably the main thing that changed since 2019 or things like the years before COVID, that before COVID, offsites were usually something that like only executive teams do, or companies that are just very much like remote, but not a lot of companies were were remote pre-COVID. I think now it's becoming something that is more common. It's definitely for me and my co-founder, it's definitely our kind of like why now, why we decided to start this business, because the frequency of this event has increased and the complexity of this event has increased.
Yeah.
Because it's not only about fun. It's not only about team building activity. It's a lot about how you kind of actually enhance your team, how you make the experience better, how you create this experience, something that people can actually feel motivated for like 4 or 5 months after the event. And because this is the way you can do it, otherwise you wouldn't be able to convince your finance team to do it on a quarterly basis or like biannual basis. So I think pre-COVID, it was just mostly about fun. And now it's definitely evolved into something that is much more strategic.
Is it fair to say that most companies have seen other companies do this kind of thing and they do a copycat version with less intentionality? So it's just like, we're going to go have fun and do axe throwing, and that'll fix the culture.
Yeah.
Whereas the companies that actually do it well have more intentionality behind it. They might post about it on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
2 different companies, the company that did it intentionally, company that copied company A. And so they'll do the same thing, but the outcome is different because they didn't. And so I'm wondering, is the platform, is the platform that Townish solving the how behind it, right? Like, here's the suppliers, but the how is so important in terms of like, go do axe throwing. But by the way, this is what you should be doing and thinking about behind the scenes. Match up people that don't work together very often versus like people falling into their usual cliques or whatever.
Yeah, it's a good question because this is actually the AI caveat that I want to
speak
about.
Go for it. Talk about those robots.
So I think AI gonna help us in like many ways, but specifically about this one of the things that like we are planning to get to in the next few years is actually providing you best practices of how to run an event and what will be a good event for your team based on similar teams. Because this is very complex and you need a lot of data for it, and you can do it like, you can do it just based on like asking people from the industry and asking experts. But there's a lot of like things that going into events and a lot of like moving pieces that you will need a lot of data to solve in order to actually show companies what worked for other companies that were similar size, similar budget, similar vibe. So we are working on different features now, and we're probably going to launch them in the first quarter of 2024. But it's not going to be perfect because we need more data for it to be perfect. And this is where AI comes into play. It comes to play into some other places if you want to.
Of course.
So I think for us, one of the main challenges in general for building a marketplace is the acquisition of supply. Okay, I live in Toronto. I know that StartWell is an amazing co-working space, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, I live in Toronto. I know that like that this guy is doing like the best leadership coaching. Okay, but now I want to launch Chicago or Boston or LA. How do I find the best StartWell in Boston? And I think this is where AI comes into play. And like the fact,
honestly, a lot of our clients are like, can you please open a location in Montreal, in Calgary, in Vancouver?
Yeah, but I think, and it's funny because we can also speak about it, but like when I started actually thinking about the idea of Townish, it actually started also as a real estate play. And then I understood I can just better scale as a software business because it's going to be extremely challenging for me to build StartWell in all of the cities in the US. I hope that you do, by the way. You're going to be our first partner.
Plans have changed.
Yeah.
Kasim's got to go.
I have a different approach to scale. I'm not so sexed up by like not seeing my daughter as much and having to be on planes.
Yeah,
that's fair.
So I think AI gonna help us enhance the supply acquisition and get actually more suppliers that's good for us in different places across the world, across North America. It's also obviously gonna help with the demand, like to actually build the event and build packages across different services, because what we do now very manually is actually build packages for clients. So, okay, you want to go to StartWell, you want to eat dinner in the area, you want to do like a team building activity in the area. Okay, we're going to build a package around it. And as we scale, we're going to do it with AI. We're going to build these packages across different criteria, across different parameters, like location, like budget, like type of service, type of event. And AI going to facilitate all of it in a very, very, scalable way.
It's funny.
But how soon is that future? Because that's literally like a 1 month coding sprint with GPT.
It was yesterday.
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm actually, it's funny because I told you, like, I'm very aggressive. I'm very, I'm very quick to do a lot of things. But one of the things that we've decided, me and my co-founder, is we want to focus on Ontario to begin with. We want to actually figure out the kinks of the product here before we scale to other regions. And figuring out the kinks of the product is not only about enhancing supply, because we already have supply. It's about building a platform that the users can actually use. It's about building the agenda for the events. It's about actually automation of the marketplace, because now we are the one that like just do the transactions, but we want people to be able to book things automatically. So we have like a full roadmap for like the next 18 months. It doesn't include the enhanced supply in different regions. But I think in 2025, we're going to start expand to other regions and other locations. And then the time we're going to execute on this.
Cool, man. So you got your horizon set. How does that feel, by the way? I'll ask you this because now you've gone from this kind of like consultant to in-house kind of consultant, employee, co-owner in the terms of the growth vision and taking on scaling companies role. And now you're an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And you have a co-founder. Who's your co-founder? And how do you guys stay motivated as entrepreneurs now versus your previous career history?
Yeah, my co-founder, his name is Cam. He's an engineer. He lives in Waterloo, so he's kind of like part of like the Kitchener Waterloo mafia. He was VP of engineering for like few startups in Kitchener Waterloo area. He was the VP of engineering for Daylight. He was VP of engineering for Myovision, and he was also senior director at EA Sports. So there's a lot of engineering experience, a lot of coding experience, and he just runs. Like he's one of the people that's like, if he has like the vision and like and a good design, to be honest, he can just run with it and just code like crazy. So, and we actually found each other through a mutual friend that connected us and told me, you have to meet Cam. Cam is very passionate about this. His wife is actually in the same industry. We've been always speaking about it. You have to meet Cam. And then when I met Cam, it was the day that he decided to leave his old job and decided he wanted to start something. And he actually didn't know what he wanted to start.
Serendipity.
Right time,
exactly.
right
The universe is providing.
There you go.
Yeah, so I guess serendipity, karma, whatever. But like, and so we decided to start working together. Kind of like did this like stress test. And we've been working since probably now 9-10 months.
It's awesome.
That stress test.
It's important.
So important. Like takeaway for anyone listening in terms of like, I'm going to start my own thing. Like stress test who you work with.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's interesting because like if you're doing this kind of like accelerator startup, rapid company development thing, then often cases it's really about like throw people into the boiler pot and like, if you can't stand the pressure, it's because you're not a super bro.
Yeah.
And like, that's just stupid. Yeah, I think if you're building a company and you want it to be your thing, and you're going to commit to it, and there's so much pain down that road that like doing it alone is difficult, let alone with somebody else.
Yeah, I'm very much in the camp that like that you should do it with someone, just because mentally it's very consuming. It's tough, and also you need complementary skills. So yeah, I can do a lot of things. I've probably managed or like kind of like spearheaded or like managed horizontally a bunch of like departments, like talent, sales, customer success, a lot of departments, but I'm not an engineer by no means. You need someone that can actually build. You need someone that can actually execute on a product vision. And you need someone that also complements you, I think, in terms of like values and in terms of, of day to day. And I think, me and Cam are like very different, in many ways, but we also like very much aligned in terms of values, very much aligned in terms of where we want this company to get to. And I think, it's like, just for me, I can't have it any other way. That's like...
That's awesome. That means that you're excited about what you're doing.
Very excited, very passionate. And I think, like you said, like when you just mentioned the horizon, I think it's not a 1-year gig. It's like, I know, like it's complicated. It's like, it's 10 years, 12 years, 8 years, whatever. But like, I think people are like very much like, it's like this quote, like people are usually they overestimate what they can achieve in a year, and they underestimate what they can achieve in 10 years. And I think that's really is the case. I think, especially when you build a marketplace, it's tough. You need to sell to 2 sites. You need to operationalize a lot of things. It's not like building like some AI gig that maybe like in 2 weeks gonna be able to generate some revenues, but in the next 2 weeks, a lot of people are gonna be able to copy. You need to actually build the moats, and building the moats is doing it with a lot of like sweat, blood, and tears. So I think, like both of us are here for like for the long run. Both of us understand that this is a long journey. But we want to change the industry, and we want to change the way events are run. And we think we have a good opportunity to disrupt this industry, which is very, very much, I would say, antiquated, old. You wouldn't believe sometimes, like working with like hotels, everyone like using different systems.
So if you talk about an industry that you fit into, you're specifically talking about corporate events, is it?
Talking about events in general, corporate events, yeah, because I think we definitely focus on corporate events, but I think the entire events industry is a little bit broken, or a little bit like just needs, a shakeup.
Big families, right? Like,
so I'm like,
could I use the platform to plan a Christmas gathering?
So we're not going to block you, but we,
good.
But we're not going to sell you. That's the thing.
Does that sound like they're excited for those customers?
Like
we're not going to block you.
No, our vision is to have like
take your money.
Our vision is to have like an open marketplace. So you'll be able to use the marketplace to, and it's, by the way, it's the same that happened to us with like Platterz. We did have people like ordering food for like bar mitzvahs or weddings or whatever. We never sold to these people because it just doesn't make sense in terms of unit economics. You can't afford actually to acquire this customer because there's not going to be a frequency of events. There's not going to be a frequency of orders. It just doesn't make sense in terms of like the lifetime value of the customer. And it just doesn't make sense in terms of like the focus of the product because you build a product for business people. So I think, but we're not going to block the marketplace, and it's also going to be open for a lot of like team leads and a lot of people that are not necessarily the people that we're going to sell to, but once the product is fully operating, fully can execute fully any type of event, I believe that also team leads are going to be able to use it, and not necessarily only people and culture and HR people.
Yeah. Cool, man. It's awesome. Well, it was really nice hearing your career history leading up to this point and how excited you are to solve the problems that you're doing with especially that cautious approach to getting better at what you're doing. I think that's cool. It's exciting to hear that,
I think I just know better now, right? Like it's like I'm not 20 years old anymore. So yeah.
Wicked, man.
That's why it's going to succeed.
Hopefully.
Thanks for joining us on the podcast, man.
Thanks for having me.
Right on. Let's pound that out. Boom.
Boom.
Here, let's do a triple boom.
Boom.
Triple boom.